see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy and Compassion. And I'm so pleased today to have Thubten Chodron here for this dialogue. I thank you for joining me.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me.
So let me give a little bit of background first. You're an American Tibetan Buddhist nun, and I see a central figure in reinstating ordination of women, I guess, in the Buddhist tradition. And you're the founder and abbess of, you might have to help me here with the pronunciation of the Shravasti Abbey.
That's it. Shravasti Abbey. Very well done.
It's a Buddhist monastery near Newport, Washington. And I see also that you're been active in interfaith dialogue as well, and also in the you do work with the Dharma outreach in prisons and teach the Dharma worldwide. And also saw you do a lot of books, very prolific author. And the one that I'll point out, since it's really related to this topic, is Cultivating a Heart of Compassion, the Yoga Method of Chenrezig.
Chenrezig.
Yeah, okay.
The food of compassion.
Yeah. So would you like to add anything else by way of introduction? And I also can show your website as you talk about some of these things. I can actually show on the screen, your website and so forth.
Okay. Well, one thing people may be interested in is I'm doing a book together with Russell Coles, who you interviewed previously. And let me see if I can remember the title, Living with an Open Heart, Compassion in Everyday Life. And so we're going to be talking a lot about empathy and compassion in that book. And hopefully it'll be out sometime next year.
Yeah, well, you've really done a lot of writing. It seems like you're a very prolific author. It looked like there was 7, 8 books or so that you've done.
Something. I haven't counted.
You don't count.
Another book that people might be interested in is Working with Anger. Because, if we're going to have empathy and compassion, we have to do something with our anger. So. Yeah,
that's great. I'm really interested in the abbey that you set up there. It looks very idyllic here. It's I'll show it up on the screen. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful place. We have 240 acres in northeast Washington state. And Buddhism is new to the West, and especially Buddhist monastics are new. And we didn't have a place to live. And so I really wanted to set something up so that the people who come after me wouldn't have to go through what I did in training here, there, everywhere, getting moved around. So in 2003, we got the land, and there was a house on it, and people have started coming. So we have a community of 12, almost 13 people. Somebody new's coming soon. And 8 of those are now monastics. And we do lots of events for people on the outside so that they can come and learn about the Dharma or the Buddhist teachings, learn meditation, things like that. And we also do quite a bit of work, with working with anger, developing a compassionate heart, because there's a whole method in Buddhist teachings for training the mind in compassion, which is really valuable.
Well, usually I've been starting these dialogues off, with finding out what the interviewee, what their most important value in life is, and how did that value become important to you? So just kind of personally, what is your most important value?
I would say, the thing that pops into my mind first is living in a meaningful way. And I would say that if we live in a meaningful way, that encompasses other values like kindness, compassion, empathy, honesty, friendliness, wisdom, generosity. But to me, the whole thing comes down to really living a meaningful life in all aspects of our life, not just you know, Sunday morning aspect, so to speak.
How did that become important to you? Do you have some kind of a story or anecdote of, at what point you
Uh,
learned some lesson about the importance of meaning in your life?
well, you know, I was a 60s kid. So I grew up with that question, you know, of who am I and what's the meaning? Um, you know, and so that was always, I mean, all through school, it was a very important thing, especially, you know, growing up in the Vietnam era, growing up in the civil rights era, um, living in a middle class community, and yet seeing the rest of the world was so different from the way I lived. Then, you know, asking, well, what's the meaning of my life? What's the purpose of my life? If there's so much suffering like this, then, you know, what's going on? And why am I fortunate to live in a, you know, a comparatively peaceful country compared to others? Why do I have enough to eat and other people don't? So that was going through my mind all during high school. And so I started doing some exploring. I went to Leo Buscaglia's love class because I was a student at USC. Uh, and, you know, I went to different religious leaders in the community and just asked about the meaning of life. And I couldn't find anything that makes sense. People had lots of different answers, but none of it really resonated with me at all. I had some feeling that having a meaningful life meant contributing to the welfare of others, to helping others. You know, that I already knew, but exactly how, what, why, and so that was a big question. And then also, I saw that if I wanted to do something to benefit others, I had to do something with myself first, because I mean, face it, we aren't very, we don't have a lot of equanimity towards other people. And, you know, I heard people say, love thy neighbor as thyself, which sounded fantastic, but I didn't know how to do that. And all the adults I asked when I was a kid, they didn't know how to do that either. And I saw people getting quite angry and quite vicious, and the country at war in order to live in peace. And none of it made much sense to me. So there was a period in my life where I completely threw religion out, because I studied history, and it seemed like religion was one of the causes of so much warfare and so much strife. So I threw religion out for a period in my life and still had those questions. Uh, and then it wasn't until in my early 20s I happened to encounter Buddhism, specifically Tibetan Buddhism, in the tradition of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I went to a course, and one of the first things they said is, you don't have to believe anything we say. I said, oh, good. Now I'll listen. And so I listened, and as I thought about what they said logically, as I practiced it in my own life, I saw that it really helped, and that it showed me a way to look at life so that I had meaning in my life, and so that I could overcome, a way to overcome my own anger, my own bias, all the things that interfered with genuinely helping others. And so I still have all those afflictions. I haven't gotten rid of all of them yet, but there's a way to do it, and we can practice that way. And so just knowing that and engaging in that practice, to me, gives so much meaning in my life.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were a real seeker, kind of a 60s seeker, kind of looking for that meaning in life. And
Yeah.
you went on this whole journey of looking at different approaches, religions or not religions, and then you kind of found the Tibetan Buddhism, and it really resonated, and some of the approaches
Yeah.
gave you a sense of meaning and a way of kind of connecting to yourself and
Yep.
others.
Yep.
Oh,
That's
that's
it.
it. Good. We got it. So, well, it's interesting story because I was, kind of a little post 60s, and I ended up traveling around the world, kind of doing seeking, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was a real seeker as well. So I have a real resonance there with your
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I traveled around the world too because I figured I had to see more than middle class America. Yeah, and see what the world's about and learn from life. So,
Yeah, that was
yeah, I
my
think
same story too. It's like learn by doing. You're not going to learn by school. I'm going to learn by doing and putting myself in
yeah.
relationship with more people. And so, yeah,
Yep.
it's a good way of doing it. So,
Mm-hmm.
well,
Mm-hmm.
for me, as you landed on Buddhism, I've kind of landed on empathy and compassion as being these kind of foundational values. Because I kind of grew up
Yeah.
in an evangelical Christian household, and that kind of like melted away, and I really started seeing that these values were really the underlying values, of all humanity. And so I'm wondering, how do you uh your video just froze. I hope you're still there. Yeah, we just had a little interruption there with the video, but we're back online. So yeah, I was just like you as a seeker, and had kind of come. I knew the answers to life. It was like Christianity and so forth. And then I traveled around the world for 10 years, and it's just like you. Sounds like you did too. And then really started seeing that people were pretty much alike all over. It was really the underlying values that was important. And
Yeah.
then it seemed to me like empathy and compassion were really what kind of brought people together. So I was wondering, from your story, the
Mm-hmm.
connection. How do you see the connection of meaning, which you say is your most important value, to empathy and compassion?
Well, because if what I say, if you're going to have a meaningful life, it has to do with contributing to the well-being of others. So if you want to contribute to the well-being of others, you have to have empathy and compassion. If you don't, you have no motivation to contribute to their well-being. And even if you tried, it's going to come out all wrong because the motivation is tangled up.
So, are you saying that the meaning in your life is really about contributing to the well-being of others? Is that kind of what meaning kind of means?
Definitely. Contributing to the well being of others in many, many different ways. Okay. So, not only through being socially engaged in this life, but from a Buddhist perspective, because we believe in rebirth, um, meaning and developing empathy and compassion occurs over a continuum of lifetimes. So, even our spiritual practice, where we're meditating to develop empathy and compassion, that is indirectly contributing to the well being of others because unless we work on ourselves, how are we going to be a benefit? You can't just go in with this kind of idealistic mind that says, "Oh, I'm going to benefit everybody," but you don't really know what benefit means, and you don't know what to do with your own anger, and you don't know what to do with your own clinging attachment, and all those things cause problems when you're actually trying to benefit. And so I think we need to spend some time, or at least I know I do, in silent contemplation to really look at what's going on in my mind so that I can cultivate a genuine motivation of compassion that is also linked with wisdom. Because if the compassion's not together with wisdom, it becomes what we call idiot compassion. And idiot compassion actually can create a lot of harm.
Well, we're talking about empathy and compassion. There's so many different definitions of empathy and compassion, and I mean, I've interviewed a lot of academics, and they all kind of actually come from different points of view as well about that. But I found that kind of by looking at metaphor, it kind of helps illuminate the definition a bit. And, empathy is often defined as the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes or looking through someone else's eyes. And for me, empathy is like a cornucopia, because when I'm connecting with others, it's kind of like a richness. I'm expanding my sense of who I am, and it's a more rich life that I feel like I have.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, for you, if you were to create your own metaphor of empathy and or compassion, what would it be like to you, metaphorically?
I think the one you gave of standing in somebody else's shoes or looking at life through their eyes is very, very good for empathy. For compassion, because in Buddhism we say compassion is the wish for living beings to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. So in one way, I think it's, if you're really in tune with your own experience, then you realize that everybody else is exactly like you. And there's no difference in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering.
So is that quite a metaphor, or?
No, that's not quite a metaphor. I don't know that I always think metaphorically.
Yeah, some people don't. So that's fine.
Let me think. There's maybe seeing ourselves as all seeing ourselves all in, I can't come up with a metaphor exactly, that would fit what I'm feeling.
Yeah. I have one for compassion that just kind of hit me, and it's like compassion is kind of like a firefighter. It's putting out the flames of somebody's house, right? It's like, and that's kind of metaphorically, it's the flames of suffering. That you're kind of going and putting water on that would be kind of like the alleviation of the suffering or something.
That works in that respect. For me, though, when there's a fire, there's a certain element of panic, and when we have panic, it interferes with really being compassionate. Yeah, so it is putting out the fire of others' suffering, but let's not bring the panic into there.
Yeah, so it would be like a firefighter. If a firefighter or someone is seeing a fire, and then they're, oh my goodness, it's a fire, it's terrible, it's horrible, and they're like in total distress themselves. Right. They're not being a good firefighter. They're not being, because they're in such distress themselves. So they need a little bit of calming so that they can work effectively, kind of.
Right, and decide where to throw the water, because if you're panicked yourself as a firefighter, you might throw the water in the wrong place. Yeah, or you might not throw water, you might throw oil instead. So, it needs to come from a very stable, centered place in ourselves.
Yeah, we actually just had a little story here. We had a fire like next door here, and it was like a bunch of bamboo had kind of caught on fire. And it was like, for me, it was amazing. I went there, and it's like people were almost like frozen. The neighbors, they're just standing there watching. It was about to burn down their garage. And I kind of jumped into action. I ran, and I, turned on the water hoses and started spraying. And then, went to some people and said, hey, you spray here, you do this, you do that. And so I was really taking action to put out that fire. So, but what amazed me is that some people just kind of froze. It's like they didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, it's the same way, I think, sometimes people, when seeing other people suffering, they freeze. It's too overpowering for them. don't know how to handle it without falling into personal distress. So they kind of freeze. Or sometimes even regarding our own suffering, we freeze, rather than kind of relax and say, okay, how can I make this suffering part of my life experience that's going to help me grow and become a better person? Instead of knowing a way to do that, their first reaction is, I can't stand it, get it away. Yeah. And then you freeze like that. But I think often, even with our own suffering, we have to make peace with it and find a way to transform it so it becomes meaningful in our lives.
Well, that's what these dialogues are really about. It's really, how do we build a culture of empathy and compassion? So in a sense, if we're metaphorically, it's like, how do we all become effective firefighters, perhaps? It's like, how, if we're expanding on that metaphor. So what are your kind of insights into, how do we build a culture that really, is grounded in empathy and compassion, that people know how to put out these fires of pain and suffering?
Yeah. I think that there's two aspects to it. One is what we do internally, one is what we do in society. And I think both these aspects are really important, because society is nothing more than a group of individuals. And society is not going to change unless individuals change. We can't legislate empathy and compassion. It has to be cultivated within each individual. So that's why I think quiet time each day to sit and reflect and look at what's going on in our own mind. Look at our anger, look at our greed, learn the antidotes to apply to those mental states. Look at the bias that we have that doesn't enable us to connect with everybody, but discriminates between friend, enemy, and stranger, and learn the ways of dealing with this. And this is what I found so helpful in Buddhism, is that, they say, okay, you want to develop your mind to have this kind of emotion or this kind of quality. Here's what you do. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So I really found a method there. And so to spend that time internally working, that's one.
Okay, let me just reflect that. So you're saying kind of two parts. There's kind of the individual, kind of cultivating it, then kind of the societal part. And for the individual, it's really about kind of setting aside some time and space for doing an exploration of what's going on inside myself. And that's through meditation, is kind of a methodology that you use to really explore yourself and really set aside that time for that exploration.
Yeah. I think that's really vital, because otherwise people suffer from compassion burnout, or their motivation gets skewed in some way and they get quite angry at the same people they're trying to help. So that doesn't work. So that internal time is like really, really crucial. And also because I think a lot, when we're trying to help with compassion, a lot of the help is who we are, our presence. It's not a technique that you use. Yeah, because you see that when somebody like the Dalai Lama, goes to speak. I've talked to so many people who are not Buddhist. They'll go listen to the Dalai Lama speak. He walks in the room and they tell me the tears come to their eyes. Well, why? They can feel his compassion right there. I mean, his presence speaks something quite loudly. So often in many situations, it's our presence that is what really communicates to people and what is really beneficial. On top of that, then when we know specific things and what to do and we can actively do them, then that's really fantastic. Yeah.
So it's
But
perhaps it's like that presence that if we're building on this firefighting metaphor, if somebody's house is burning down and they're kind of all in distress and everything, if you come in with a sense of calmness and presence, one, they're going to feel like, oh, I'm not alone in this, right? They're going to feel each other, your presence. They're going to get a little bit of relaxation themselves. And then that would be one way of contributing. They're going to calm down and they might be able to think more effectively of what to do.
yeah, yeah, that's one way to do that. But also, the firefighter is is also just like the person in the house. Because if you have this idea of, I'm the firefighter, my house isn't burning, your house is burning, I'm the firefighter, I'm going to come and save you, forget it. That doesn't work. You know, in a fire, maybe it works because it's an urgent situation and you just, have to do that. But in terms of, I think, really benefiting others, there can't be this difference of, I'm okay and together, and I have the answers for you and I'm going to save you. That kind of attitude doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so there's this one beautiful metaphor that Shantideva, an 8th century Indian sage, used. And he said, when the foot steps on a thorn, the hand reaches down and pulls the thorn out of the foot. It's very, very natural. The hand doesn't go, oh, look, foot, I told you not to walk there. You walk there, you idiot. I, the great and glorious hand, would never do something like that. You're suffering, so I'm going to pull the thorn out of you, and you better remember how kind I am to you. So, that's not compassion. That's not empathy. It has to be just like the hand pulling the thorn out of the foot. It's just, you're on the same level. And it's like suffering is suffering. It doesn't matter whose it is. It needs to be alleviated.
So it's really like the house then, that the house is burning down. It's like, well, maybe I'll help you with your house or I won't. It's really, this is our house. It's like, this is really part of me and you're part, and I'm part of you and you're part of me. And it's like a whole different way of looking at it, that it's really like it's like a shared world kind of coming out of.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And then when you're doing your action, you're doing the action kind of in a shared, integrated way somehow with the other person. You're not like pushing, saying, step aside, I'll take over or something. It's like, let's work on this together.
Right. Right. And also showing them how to put out their own fires. Yeah. Supporting and encouraging them and learning how to become a firefighter. Admitting that I too have fires. Yeah. That I'm still in the process of training. Yeah. So I think all of that is really quite important. Let me give you one example. One of my friends told me a story. He was in Berkeley one time, and there was a woman who was sitting on the street, homeless, begging. And he went to give her some money. He only had $1 or something. And he handed it to her with both hands and looked her in the eye and said, I wish I had more, but this is what I have, and gave her the money. And she started crying. And she said, that's the first time anybody's looked at me with respect. Yeah, and that respect meant more to her than the money. Yeah, and it was the fact that he was able to connect with her on a heart level and not see themselves as different, and see her own internal goodness, see her as a worthwhile human being. That was, real compassion in action. The money was, that's nice.
Yeah, I
But
kind
it
of
was,
wonder about that. Sometimes you hear about the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
yeah,
And I think it's really inverted. It's like they say, it's the money and the food and all that, well, important. But that need for connection between people, I think, is just so fundamental that it's kind of
yes,
underappreciated.
definitely. And I find in my work with inmates, that's the whole thing that speaks louder than anything is I treat them like I treat everybody else. And for people in prison, that doesn't happen in prison. And usually in their families, they weren't, you know, they didn't grow up in an environment where people respected each other. So just that natural human respect and appreciation for somebody as a living being, knowing they have some good qualities, knowing they can make a contribution, and acknowledging that you know is so valuable. I really agree with you that maybe Maslow's thing needs to we need to bring connection down into one of the basic levels of need.
Well, as you've noticed, when you're talking about these different aspects, I keep going back to the metaphor. So it's kind of like in that metaphor, it's like saying that everyone's house is of value. It's not like saying this neighborhood
Yeah,
I'm just going to throw some money at this neighborhood, and this neighborhood is worthless, and the folks here, it's like seeing every house, everyone that's having, maybe would have a fire at their house, that every one of those is really valuable and
yeah,
equally valuable, or something like that.
exactly, exactly.
Well, you
Yeah.
you had oh, yes, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say why? Because we're all living beings. We all want happiness. We want to be free of suffering. And we all uh, are worthy of being happy and worthy of being free of suffering simply by the fact that we exist and we have human potential and we have inner goodness, you know? And so I think we really, for empathy and compassion to flourish, we have to be able to look at everybody we encounter in that way without this discrimination of, you're better than, your life is more important than your life. Or you're more worthy of happiness than you are. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, because that bias, that is always, the bias is always around me, isn't it? My friends, yeah, my friends are more worthy of compassion and help. My relatives are more worthy of compassion and help. Those people who harm me, they're worthy of suffering. They aren't worthy of happiness. And then that's the mentality of war, isn't it? It's the mentality of bigotry.
Yeah, it's kind of like gated communities, right? It's like, well,
Hmm.
this is my gated community. I'm not going to worry about your fire over there, when
Right.
just not seeing the
But yeah,
commonality of.
yeah. But we live in a world where we're so dependent on each other that we can't survive without everybody else. You can't live in a gated community in yeah, it's funny how we try and live in gated communities as our world is getting more globalized, because it just doesn't work. Because if we want to be happy, we need we if we want to be happy, we want to live in a good environment. To live in a good environment, we want to live with other people who are happy, because when we live with people who are miserable, it's going to affect our own happiness. So that's why the Dalai Lama says, if you really want to be selfish, take care of others, because if you take care of others, you're going to affect the whole environment in a way that contributes to your own happiness. We're not isolated individuals.
Yeah, it's kind of, maybe I keep going back to that metaphor again. It's that the fire over in your house is going to spread and burn down my house too.
My house, exactly. You know?
We're connected in that way. You know, it's like fire doesn't stop at the boundary. It can just, the sparks can kind of go over and they're going to burn down my place too.
Right. And how can I sit in my house and be comfortable looking out the window watching your house burn?
Yeah.
How can I live with myself and say, oh, but that's their house, I don't need to pay any attention to it, when it's sitting there burning in front of my eyes? You know, we're human beings with feelings. I think it becomes difficult to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that kind of ties in with mirror neurons. I don't know if you've been looking at the science of mirror neurons, where when we do an action and see an action, the same neurons fire in our brain. So when our house is burning down and when we see a house burning down, the same neurons are firing, kind of in that sense. So the house is kind of burning in our brain, you know, in our neurons. So we're not disconnected from each other, really.
No, not at all.
Well, in terms of you know, how to build a culture of empathy, I mean, you had mentioned education in the schools is another kind of a strategy. How do you see that?
Oh, I think that's so important, you know, because it all starts with kids, doesn't it? And kids, you know, what's their role model for conflict resolution? You know, is Batman movies. And, you know, what they see on TV, they don't have good role models for resolving conflict. And I think now with the digital age, people are so, you know, into exercising their thumbs that the kids don't know how to communicate with real life human beings. And the parents are also involved. You know, life has become 2 inches by 4 inches. And, you know, real living beings have somehow been left out. So I think in education, what we really need is you know, being in a room together, you know, not creating empathy over the screen, but in a room together. And, you know, there are many really good programs now teaching children, first of all, how to identify what they're feeling. Because even many adults have difficulty identifying what they're feeling. So teach children, how do you know when you're angry? How do you know when you have compassion? How do you know when you're greedy? You know, how do you know when you're sad? So they can identify their feelings. And then teaching kids good ways to express their feelings and good ways to communicate with others. And I was going to suggest as somebody else for you to interview a friend of mine, Sophie Langry, because she does nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's technique. She does that in schools with elementary level kids. And the stories are incredible, how kids really learn to tune in to what other children are feeling. And there's a motor outside.
I was just wondering, I was hearing a little bit of a noise. Is that
yeah.
Is that an airplane or something? Or
I don't know.
Oh.
No, it's dying out. Okay. So really teaching kids that other people have feelings just like they do, and how to, you know, acknowledge others' feelings, how to think of what other children need, how to think of their own actions, how their own actions affect other people. And I think all of that really needs to be taught in schools with real live situations, you know, so that when there's a conflict in the classroom, you really stop and you deal with it right there and then and there. And everybody can watch. And everybody can take part in some way. Because I was a teacher before I became a Buddhist monastic. And I've always felt that the purpose of education is to bring up good citizens, good world citizens. Kids will learn math and English, yeah, those kind of things will come. But unless you have a mental state that knows how to be a good world citizen, all your knowledge is wasted. It's not going to bring a good result for the planet. So I think this kind of stuff is really important. So, if I could create the curriculum, I would do away with standardized testing as much as I possibly could, and educate teachers so that teachers know how to work with their own emotions, and so that they can teach kids how to do that. And while you're teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, science, geology, and so forth, all these personal skills get modeled. So I'm not saying you don't need the other topics, but just by the way you are as a human being, you model good personal skills teaching other topics. And then, like I said, really teaching kids how to communicate. Because I remember one time staying at a friend's house. They were in a flat, and I heard the children playing outdoors. You know what they were playing? Divorce. Yeah. You be the husband, you be the wife. We're mad at each other. Let's play divorce. Where are kids getting that model from, that's what they're playing? They're getting it a lot from the media. And they're not seeing the kind of role models that they need to learn how to solve their own conflicts.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit, I don't know if maybe it would be good to put on the headphones with the microphone, because it could be like a leaf blower or somebody doing some gardening or...
Yeah. Okay. Let me, I have to plug it in just a second. Okay, is it working now?
I'm not sure if it's using the headset microphone or if you put your hand over the microphone, I could tell if it's coming through the mic or not.
Okay, how's that?
I'm still...
Yeah,
I don't
not
think
getting it.
There's within Skype, if you can set the microphone.
Oh.
If you go under...
Okay.
Well,
how is it now? Is it coming through now? No, my microphone, there's the thing that says mute your microphone, which I don't want to do. Unless I have, let me see here.
It's actually within Skype itself.
Oh, okay.
If we go into tools, options, well, I'm not hearing it in the background now, so
okay, yeah. No, it isn't in the background.
Oh.
It isn't outside.
Yeah, well, maybe we could I guess you could undo it since...
Undo it? Okay.
Okay. Sounds like they left.
Okay.
So, okay, well, we'll pick up from there.
Okay.
I got a little bit of echo there. Yeah, where were we? It was about, so it's really about education. So it's really systematically teaching education, and the children are really mirroring what they're seeing from the adults.
Yeah.
So if they're watching conflict in politics, conflict in the family, they're kind of like picking that up, and they're just mirroring that back and kind of practicing it. So we really need to teach empathy and compassion kind of systematically in the schools, is what I was hearing.
Definitely. And I think also that the media really plays a huge part. And I would like to see more discussion of media ethics, actually, because, kids are glued to the screen for so many hours a day. And the media deliberately creates conflict situations, even in, TV programs, because conflict gets your hormones going, gets your body activated, and then that keeps your attention. But for young kids, what it's doing is, creating the pattern of having those emotions. And if you want to talk about the brain, it creates the neural pathways also. And, and then the kids just think, well, this is the way you behave. And in the media, whether it's the news or TV programs, what we call entertainment, I think is really very, very skewed. And kids just copy that. Because what I've found so totally incredible is in the event in Aurora, Colorado, they were watching Batman and it was an incredibly violent scene. When the scene of the violence was on the screen, it was entertainment. When the guy came in and the violence was right there in their lives, it no longer was entertainment. Now, my question is, why is watching violence on a screen entertaining? And, if it's entertaining on a screen, shouldn't you think when it's really happening, it's equally as entertaining? Mm-hmm. To me, there's something very, very wrong with our fascination with violence and how we're so hooked into that. And that's what kids call entertainment. So that numbs your feeling of empathy and compassion.
Yeah, that's almost like watching houses burn down for fun, right? I mean, if we're using that metaphor, it's like, it's great fun to watch other people's houses burn down. But when suddenly, when somebody's coming to burn down your house, then suddenly it's not okay or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's for, when we're talking about media, it seems to me the media needs to be kind of retrained with, to be mediators. And in a sense, the media are almost like arsonists in many ways.
Yes.
They're out there kind of stoking fires for that fun, and they really need to be like mediators, and which is a firefighter themselves to know how to maybe look. They could be out there looking for fires, and then be finding ways to put them out instead of it's like screaming and yelling, "Hey, here's a fire! Here's a fire! Look at this! Look at this!"
Yeah. And it comes from very skewed values in our society. Just, people thinking money is the meaning of their life. And so you stoke the fires because it sells more papers, gives more media. And that's quite skewed, I think.
Yeah, so some of
the media.
Oh, you'd also mentioned, we talked about familiarizing, so really working on yourself too as a way of creating empathy and compassion. And then I think you'd also before had mentioned in the email, you'd mentioned about the workplace, that we need to kind of transform the workplace as well to foster empathy. How do you see that?
Yeah. Well, I think again, learning good communication techniques within the workplace. I think having lunches, brown bag lunches with speakers, that teach empathy, teach communication skills and so on, because the workplace can be a place for education. And then also, especially the leaders of organizations and the managers in companies, the CEOs, because the whole flavor of what's happening in the organization is very much set by the people in positions of power. And if they are good listeners, like you're a very good listener, and if those people can be very good listeners, it sets the whole tone for how people are going to work together in the workplace. Yeah. So I think, people doing their MBA degrees, getting more training in empathy and compassion. People in managerial positions. And then also, of course, everybody in a company or everybody in a workplace being trained together. Yeah, I think very helpful. Because when you do these kinds of trainings, a lot of the exercises are ones where people are working together. So it gives employees a chance to work together and do things that is different from how they are usually together.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like
And so,
in a business, there's an environment, and if we use the metaphors of gears working together, and I think
mhm.
that the empathy really kind of lubricates those gears. It gets people working together in an effective, because if everybody's kind of all stressed out with fires, you know, it's like they're all stressed out. Oh, I got a fire inside me. You got a fire there. There's a fire between us. We're really
Yeah.
wanting to kind of lubricate and, kind of put out those fires and kind of work effectively together.
Mhm. That's exactly it. Yeah. And so paying more attention to that, having empathy and compassion more a part of our public dialogue in the media, in workplaces, in schools. Yeah.
Yeah, so we need a whole movement to really transform. I mean, that's kind of what this work is that I'm trying to do here, is really to generate
Yeah.
a dialogue like what we're doing is, start thinking about how do we transform society to
Mhm.
have more empathy, like you're saying, in the schools, in the media, in the workplace, in ourselves, in our relationships. And
Mhm.
you were also had mentioned some things that maybe are blocking that empathy. That you're
Mhm.
saying people fear being empathic and compassionate. I mean, how do you
Yeah.
why is that?
Yeah. Well, sometimes people fear that. First of all, they fear that they're going to look weak, and if they look weak, that they'll get taken advantage of. And for this, I always say, there's a difference between being empathetic and compassionate when somebody is coming on strong to you, and being afraid and being weak. And the whole difference comes across in your presence, which is a reflection of what your mind is. Because lots of people, when they feel intimidated, then, they do the whole big macho trip, and you get more conflict. When you're together and you're balanced inside, if somebody's in your face, there's a way to be kind to them that also communicates your sense of your own dignity, and your sense of holding your own ground. But you're not holding your ground in a brittle way. You're not a brick wall. You're engaging with another human being. And, I think there's ways to do that when you've really done a lot of internal work.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that it's if we're using the metaphor again of the fire, right? It's like somebody's house is on fire. You're going there, and you want to contribute, and it's how your presence that you come to it. If you're all you might be coming. The people might think, "Hey, you're coming to steal my, my
Right.
VCR or my 42-inch television or something," or you're going to help me out, and I'm going to be obliged to help you. You're going to make, it's going to be a bad deal for me, or it's like so.
Mm.
It's really there's something about presence there. It's like how you're coming to the fire, um, and it's almost like if you're coming to it and you're being seen as weak. If I go to assist someone, I'll be seen as weak. Or if yeah. So it's still a little. Maybe we can explore it a little bit more. Like,
Yeah, because the thing is, let's say a situation is somebody's, really in your face, and you're frightened and you look down and you cringe, and I mean what you express in your body language is fear. Yeah. Because this comes up in the prisons a lot, like one things that will really set people off in prison is if somebody cuts in front of you in line. I mean, they'll have whole fights about where you are in line. And I'll say to somebody, somebody comes up and cuts in front, you just say, please, I want you, stand there. I want you to go before me. And initially they say, oh no, they'll think I'm weak. I say, no, not if you do it like that. If you're afraid, they'll pick up on that. But if you're really feeling generosity in your heart of, yeah, sure, it's fine with me if you stand in front. I'm not taking this as an offense. I don't have to stand up for my ego. If you want that, sure, fine. That people will pick up on that and they won't take advantage and they won't see you as weak.
So we're really talking about the relationship of empathy and compassion and fear then, right? Is if someone's afraid and you can see that they're afraid, is that people will kind of maybe do something.
They'll
feed off that fear and keep, pushing you into deeper and deeper fear or something like that. Then if you're
empathetic and compassionate, they won't do that.
And so it's like instead of being fearful yourself, you're really hearing and being present. And I guess it would be the reflecting of the person. You're being present and seeing, oh, you've got a fire going on inside you. Or, it's like, oh, you're really got a fire going there or something,
Yeah. Tell me what's going on for you. Something like that. Yeah. So it's just that, a lot of people put being compassionate, their mental image is you become the world's doormat, And so somebody, the classic thing is, okay, domestic abuse, your husband beats you, and you say, oh dear, I love you, I have compassion, I know you beat me last night, but I'm very compassionate, I forgive you, you can beat me again tonight if you want to. That kind of forgiveness is not genuine compassion. That's stupidity. So I think people sometimes, if they confuse compassion with stupidity, then they don't want to be compassionate. And I don't blame them, So I think there's definitely a way of being compassionate where you're clear-minded and you know how to respond in a situation, And if you know that, then you aren't afraid of being seen as weak. You aren't afraid of being the world's doormat by being compassionate, because you've actually thought about what compassion means, and you know that genuine compassion does not mean giving everybody what they want. Genuine compassion often means you actually have to completely risk the relationship to do what you know is the best thing for that person, and sometimes you have to do what that person is not going to like. They're going to be furious at you, but you're doing it for their benefit, genuinely for their benefit. And so that's where the wisdom comes in to support the compassion. And that's where you see that compassion is not being a doormat and it's not being weak. Sometimes you really have to risk stuff to be compassionate.
Yeah, there's the part what I see there is it's that the weakness is that you will not be seen, right? That you will be slowly seen less and less, and then you're who you are. So you're talking about the relationship or the husband and wife. There's a sense of that there's an abuse, which means that the person who's being harmed is just saying, well, what it is that I'm feeling doesn't matter, I forgive you. And then they haven't really shared who they are and the pain that they're going through. They're just kind of suppressing it and suppressing it and suppressing it, which is a real recipe for disaster, long term.
Right. So sometimes people look at that and they say, oh, that's what compassion is.
Yeah.
That's not compassion. Yeah, like you said, it's a recipe for disaster.
So where is the compassion, the empathy and compassion in that relationship then? It's like somebody's being abusive to you. It's like, how are you bringing that to...
It's knowing that when somebody abuses you, they are also harming themselves. Because somebody who's an abuser, they damage themselves. When we damage others, we're hurting ourselves. We are the ones who have to live with us. When we abuse others, when we go to bed at night, how do we feel about ourselves? When we're on our deathbed and we've taken advantage of others and harmed others, are we going to die calmly? Forget it. So to realize if somebody is harming me, they're not only harming me, they're harming themselves. And to be able to say, this is not appropriate behavior. You may not act like this, but you're not hating the person when you're doing it. You might speak strongly to them. You might be very, very assertive, but you're not hating them.
Well, the way I'm looking at kind of dealing with those kind of situations is for me to take the position that I value a culture of empathy and compassion. So it's being very firm about that is what the core value is that I have. And I'm saying, if there's a person, kind of abusing in that sense, maybe with violence or something, standing up and saying, I value a culture of empathy and compassion. That means in the relationship here, I stand firmly for our connection. And I'm seeing that you're in great distress. You're feeling, kind of stressed, and you're really, needing to be heard or something. It's like really standing firm. So for me, real empathy and compassion is a very strong kind of position, because you're not withdrawing, you're not putting up a wall, but you're staying present, and you're standing for the empathy, compassion, and the connection.
Yeah, exactly.
I did have a story where we had an empathy tent at the Occupy Berkeley, and I was just there a couple days for a couple days, and I had this little tub of cookies. I put a sign on it and said empathy cookies, and I was going around handing empathy cookies to people and saying, "Oh, here's an empathy cookie. Come to the empathy tent, for for mediation, art, kind of different processes." And then there was a fight started, and it was one guy had the biggest, Bowie knife I'd ever seen, and then the other guy had a pipe, and they were swinging at each other, and I thought for sure somebody was gonna kill each other. And then there was a guy with the knife. He was like facing the other guy, and he had his back to me, and I kind of walked up with my empathy cookies, and I said, excuse me, and he kind of like turned around, and I thought, oh my God, I'm in over my head on this one. I don't know how to handle this. And I said, would you like an empathy cookie? And it was just like glaring, and it was like, I mean, I didn't know. I thought, this is not working out. So it's like sometimes, sometimes you're in over your head. So I'm still trying to figure out, what happened then is like somebody from the side said, oh, I'll have one of those empathy cookies. And I turned, and he took an empathy cookie, and the other guy went back to trying to kill the other guy, but it just slowed him down for a couple seconds. And maybe that's all it takes.
That could shock somebody enough. But he really went back to fighting with the other guy?
Yeah, he actually cut him. He actually did stab him. And they actually closed down the whole encampment, several days. I mean, it was about a week later, and they actually said one of the reasons we're closing it down was because of that fight. And they were literally, if he could have killed the other guy, he would have done it. And so I wasn't quite sure how to maintain my equilibrium. I mean, I was shaky for the rest of the day, after that. Yeah. So that's the hardcore. I need some more wisdom about how to deal with those kind of situations.
Yeah. Because at that time, the other guy's so revved up, he really can't take in any new information at that point. Yeah. Because it's just so sad. It's really sad. Yeah. Mind going in one direction.
Well, those are kind of the hardcore. So it's, I guess that's kind of like the prison probably has, really stressed environments like that too, I would imagine.
Yeah. But you did your best.
Yeah.
You knew They were fighting when you went.
Oh
went up
yeah,
to
they
them?
were swinging. You were like,
Yeah.
I mean, and they were swinging the pipe, and I mean, they were. I mean, I thought for sure, I could see that they were really trying to kill each other, literally, not like pretend. This was like, if I can kill you, I'm going to kill you, So
Wow.
yeah, well, that's what kind of exploring is like how to bring empathy and compassion into all those environments. And I think that it is, like you were saying, it is or well, what I was saying is that the empathy is the strength. It's not the weakness. It's that
Yes.
real empathy is not, and compassion is not being a doormat. It's standing for an empathic and a compassionate connection and being firm
Right.
about that stance.
Yeah. Yeah. And genuinely caring about the other person.
Yeah, which so when it's a firm stance saying, "I care about you. What's going on for you? That if you have a fire inside, I'm here to contribute to putting it out as well."
Yeah. 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 It's not weakness at all.
Well,
Not at all. Actually, I think when you lose your temper and you yell and scream and fight, I think that's weakness because your mind is totally uncontrolled at that time. Physically, there might be strength, but mentally, the mind is completely weak and fragile.
yeah. Well, there's different ways you can deal with it, right? You can kind of do. You can be angry. You can put up a wall. You can kind of avoid. And it seems like the empathy and compassion is maybe the presence of being, being there with those feelings and those fears. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so, are there other ideas about maybe blocks to empathy? Like, you talked about, to be able to go into those situations, that the training is important. You can't just go
Yeah,
into those environments, cold. It's like we're going to need to train ourselves, have support. Um,
right, right. That's so important, that internal work. And there's a lot to do because, like you said, in that kind of situation, it's so tempting to be afraid of in oneself. And I remember watching Mother Teresa one time go into Lebanon when they were bombing in Beirut, and she went in to get some people who were injured and take them out of the situation. And she's in that situation with bombs flying around her. And I was thinking, my goodness, the work that you have to do on yourself to make yourself fearless in that kind of situation. Yeah, to really be able to reach out in kindness and overcome your own fear. Yeah, but also at the same time having some wisdom about it. When do you go into a dangerous situation, and when is it better not to go into it? There's so many of these things where we really need a lot of wisdom.
so it's if there's fear, that we bring kindness to the fear,
Mm-hmm.
and
Even our own fear.
our own fear. Yeah, when we see our own fears, we bring kindness into our fear and to the fear of others. And
Mm-hmm.
the wisdom is also seeing that there's maybe like a dance. It's like at what point, how close do you get to it? At what.
Yeah. When is the other person able to take it in, what you're offering, and when aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a real skill in that. Yeah. And so knowing, you know, what to offer at what time, because you might be very empathetic and very kind, but the other person cannot take it in at that particular time.
Well,
So you have to know also when to step back and when just to have equilibrium in the situation, knowing that you can't control everything.
well, you had said that some people think that there's something wrong with them if they're not feeling empathy and compassion. What did you mean by that? You'd sent me that in an email.
Oh yeah, because I've had people, tell me it's like, oh, like I'll meditate on empathy or something, and I don't feel anything, yeah, or I don't feel compassion, and and so then they get into this thing of something's wrong with me, And my own personal feeling is that I would bet that they do feel empathy and compassion, but that they never learned the words when they were kids to describe those feelings. Yeah. A lot of people in their families, they've never learned the words to describe what their internal experience is. So my bet would be that that's happened. And that person does feel empathy and compassion. They may have some fears about being empathetic, like, the suffering of others is going to completely overwhelm me and I'm going to fall into personal distress. So in that case, to be able to reassure them, no, empathy doesn't mean you get overwhelmed by other people's suffering. It means that you have an internal strength inside that can endure that without falling apart yourself, And so basically, I think talking with people so that they can see their fear about empathy or their self-concept is very, very limited. Yeah, because lots of times people will say, oh, I don't feel anything, I'm incapable, something's wrong with me. That self-concept itself is what becomes the block.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? I think so often what inhibits us in our life is our own view of ourself, that we're clinging on to a very, very mistaken view of who we are and what we're capable of. And we latch onto it, we tell ourselves we can't do it, and then, oh, sure enough, we can't. Not because we don't have that potential, but because we've discouraged ourselves.
So as we have different views of ourselves, we kind of hold on to those and just don't let them evolve and they get rigid, maybe.
Yep. Yeah, and often very limited views of ourselves. I'm the person who everybody dumps on. Yeah, I can't be compassionate because they're all dumping on me. I'm too overwhelmed with my own feelings of inferiority or maybe my own feelings of anger at other people for dumping on me. But, creating an image of, oh, well, I'm the person they always dump on, or I'm always the victim. So many people have victim mentalities, or so many people say, I'm just incapable. I can't do that. Other people are so good, but me, I'm just incapable. I'm unlovable, I'm insufficient, I'm damaged goods. If you really listen to the kind of self-talk that we have in our minds very often, we can really see that our own self-image is one of our big hindering factors in our development of our good qualities. And so I think we have to become aware of that self-talk and then challenge it. So instead of believing everything we think, actually my next book is called Don't Believe Everything You Think, because I think we really have to stop believing everything we think and question some of those very rigid self-images that we have. I'm incapable of feeling compassion. Okay, well, how do you know? How do you know that's true? You tell yourself that. What proof do you have? How do you know that's true? When you start thinking of reasons, really good reasons, you really can't come up with anything. Yeah. Or I'm damaged good. Nobody's going to love me. Well, how do you know that? Is that true?
So it's kind of like these judgments. It's kind of like looking at the judgments and then really looking deeper into the judgments. Is that what you're saying? It's like, well, here's this judgment. What is making up this judgment, and kind of delving into it.
Yep. Instead of just accepting all this really horrific self-talk that puts ourselves down, to really stop and recognize it's there and then ask ourselves, is that true?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's another approach that comes to mind about that in terms of using empathy, that if we have the self-judgments, that for me it seems to come into what we're doing, what we call empathy circles, where you can actually share what it is you're feeling and have it reflected back. by others. We use kind of like a reflective listening approach, so that you share those, they get reflected back, and you get them seen, and the very process kind of transforms them into a sense of connection.
Right.
So that it's like
Right.
it's the connection that was important in the listening, and then the judgment almost kind of I don't know, it gets kind of dissolved or something.
Right. It fades by itself. Yep. Yep. I think there's many ways to do it. I think because I'm used to meditation, then I do it in the way I did. But I mean, certainly what you're describing with, because so often what people really want is just to be heard. And as soon as they feel like they've been heard, that there's the connection there, then what was, the self-judgment or what was so disturbing to them really lessens.
Well, usually I talk for about an hour, and I've kept you over, and I don't know how your schedule is, but I could talk for hours about this, and it's so delightful talking to you. So I don't know if there's any kind of final, thoughts or anything that you'd like to share before we bring it to a close, because it's very delightful chatting with you.
Thank you. This same here, and you're a very good listener. I appreciate it. I would just, last thing would be to take time every day to develop our own empathy and our own compassion, to make that a priority in our life, and to set our motivation each morning when we get up. What I do is today as much as possible, I'm not going to harm anybody. Today as much as possible, I'm going to be a benefit. And I'm going to hold my values of empathy and compassion and meaningful life and wisdom, something very dear to my heart, as, the real meaning of my life, and go towards that. And so if every morning, when we get up, we cultivate that motivation, and we see that that's the most important thing to do each day. Not go here and pick up the kids and turn in that resume and close that deal. But how we are as a human being is the most important thing we do each day.
So it's really start every day with the intention of fostering empathy and compassion, and have that intention that we hold, and kind of maybe do a morning reminder of that intention. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and then in the evening, look back and say, well, how did I do today? And when we did well, pat ourselves on the back and rejoice. Yeah?
Yeah.
We need to rejoice in our own good stuff. When we didn't do as well as we would have liked, then think about the situation and think, okay, if that happens next time, how else could I react? How else could I work with my mind? And so that we learn from our life experiences.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share, and for going over time a bit too. It's been just really wonderful talking to you.
Okay.
So
same here, and thank you for all the good work you're doing.
Thank you for your work as well.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.